Hello tarot friends, I am Moth, your miscellaneous online tarot human, and welcome to the Comparative Tarot Project. For those of you who don't know, the Comparative Tarot Project is a series of videos that I'm doing where we learn more about each card or each position in a 78 card tarot deck by looking at how different artists and different decks have depicted the same card or the same concept. And in doing so, we're trying to deepen our understanding of and relationship with the tarot, and also our understanding of the experience of being human, because that's really what the tarot is all about. If you would like a more in-depth explanation of the Comparative Tarot Project, I do have some previous videos that go into it a little more thoroughly, so I'll link to those down in the description box. Now today's video is the one that I am probably the most nervous about so far, because today is our analysis of the first card that we're including in the Comparative Tarot Project, which is the Fool. So I have 45 different versions of the Fool here in my hot little hands, and we are going to be using these to illustrate some of the concepts that the Fool represents. Now, if you would like to see every single one of these cards, my previous video was a flip through of all of the cards that I have in my collection of the Fool. So if you would like to just have a look at all of these, have a chance to ponder them before we go into the analysis today, which is part 2 of our videos on the Fool, then please by all means go back and watch the flip through video before this. Or I was thinking about this between filming that video and this one. I actually think that it could be quite useful to watch the flip through after the analysis as well, because it would give you an idea of some of the things to look out for, and you might notice things that you wouldn't have if you didn't watch the analysis first. So I think there is value in watching the flip through before the analysis or after the analysis, or maybe both if you want to do a really in-depth exploration of what the Fool means with us. Now, the reason why this is the video that I am most nervous about is because this is the one where I really test whether I'm able to say intelligent things on YouTube. I know there are intelligent things in my head. Whether I can actually get them out of my head and out of my mouth and onto a video, that is something that we're going to be testing today. So I'm rather nervous filming this video, but I trust that those of you who take the time to watch this will be understanding and kind that I am still very much learning how to do this whole YouTube thing. Now, before we go too deeply into the Fool, I do have another deck acquisition to mention, and it's one that I had already acquired before the previous video, but I forgot to mention it in that video. So, after the video of my whole tarot collection, but before the previous video, part 1 of the Fool, I had acquired a Tarot de Marseille deck. And I mainly chose to do that because I felt like if we proceeded with the project without a Tarot de Marseille, we were actually missing some fairly important historical context and a historical deck from the project. So I decided that it was well worth me investing in a Tarot de Marseille deck. Now, interestingly, there is another YouTuber named Ina with a channel called Taproot Tarot. I'll link to that below. And they specialize in historical decks. And they've got some really interesting videos about Tarot de Marseille and other historical decks. So I'll link to one of their videos about Tarot de Marseille below as well. Also, I wanted to give an apology to 2 other YouTubers who have also been incredibly encouraging to me as I'm starting out with this channel. I gave a bit of a shout out to them and a thank you in my previous video, but I realized afterwards that I had mispronounced both of their usernames. So my thank you from that video was intended to go to Maya_DN and Tammy Pie, not Tampy as I mispronounced it last time. So Maya and Tammy Pie, I apologize for mispronouncing your usernames last time. Now, to prepare for today, I've used a few sources to brush up on what the Fool signifies, and I'd like to just acknowledge those sources before we continue. So the first one is The Fool's Journey by Robert M. Place. And this book actually does something a bit similar to what we're doing in this project by looking at different versions of various cards. So I've read through the section on the Fool in that book. I've also read through the section on the Fool in 78 Degrees of Wisdom by Rachel Pollack, the classic text, which I've had for over 20 years. You can see by how yellow the pages are. I've also read through the section on the Fool in Radical Tarot by Charlie Claire Burgess, who is also the author of Fifth Spirit Tarot, one of my favourite tarot decks. And I read through the section on the Fool in Unlocking the Tarot, Create Your Own Keys by Lisa Papez. Now this book is actually kind of a guide for how I'm approaching the comparative tarot project. So this author suggests that for each tarot card, you create your own key to that card. Now, for Lisa Papez, that means a word. In my case, I'm allowing it to be a word or a phrase. And the idea is that instead of that keyword or key phrase kind of narrowing down the definitions of what that card means, it's actually kind of a gateway to all the possible meanings of that card. So it's sort of like almost like a root word or a root phrase that can help your mind connect with all the different things that that card might signify. So that's one of the things that I'm doing as part of this project. And I hope by the end of this video, I will have a key in mind for the Fool, and maybe you will too. Now, in addition to these hard copy books, I also listened to the section on the Fool in the audiobook version of 78 Acts of Liberation. And in ebook version, I read the sections on the Fool in Wildcard by Jen Cowney and Fiona Lensvelt, Finding the Fool by Meg Jones-Wall, and Queering the Tarot by Cassandra Snow. Now, as an honourable mention, which I didn't use to prep for this video, but looks like a really interesting book, I just wanted to mention Tarot in Other Words, edited by Cassandra Snow, which is an anthology of essays on tarot by queer writers. So that looks like a really interesting book as well. And then this lovely notebook is the journal that I'm using to create my own guidebook to the tarot. So I've set it up so that there's a spread for every card. There's also a spread for each number in the minor arcana. There's a spread for, or a page I should say, for each suit in the minor arcana. I would have done a spread for each suit, but there weren't just not quite enough pages to do that. I was one spread short, and then a spread for each of the major arcana. So today I'm going to start to populate my spread here on the Fool. And I'll do that by adding some of the keywords that come out for me, or the images that come out of the cards on this side, and then hopefully my personally selected key to the Fool up here, and then leaving space for me to add more information in future as I continue my journey with the tarot. Okay, now for the nerve-wracking part where I have to say intelligent things. Here we go! And on that note, in preparing for this video, I realized that I have been putting myself under quite a lot of pressure to see absolutely everything there is to see in these cards that I have available to me, and to pick out every single possible theme and variation that might be worth talking about. So, officially, right here, right now, I'm letting myself off the hook for being able to see and perceive everything that there might be to see in the cards that we're looking at today. I am not that smart. And also, where would the fun be in that? Because then there would be nothing new to discover from there on. Plus, I think it's awesome that you are going to see things that I don't see, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments about things that you notice in the cards that we're looking at today that maybe I haven't picked up. So let's do this together. So to start with, let's consider the number that appears on many Fool cards. So this one is the Pamela Coleman Smith illustrations from the Smith-Waite Tarot Centennial deck. This one is from an animal deck, the Forager's Daughter Tarot, and this one is from a deck that features modern characters, modern figures, which is the Fifth Spirit Tarot. And the authors of all of these decks will be listed in the show notes below if you'd like to find out more about them. Now you'll notice that on these 3 cards, they all have a 0 listed on them. And that's very common in depictions of the Fool. But what does that actually mean? I'm assuming that most of you are going to be reasonably familiar with the structure of a 78 card tarot deck. But for those of you who maybe are new to tarot, a very brief introduction. The tarot deck is divided into major arcana and minor arcana. The minor arcana are similar to the system that you would find in a deck of playing cards. So in a deck of playing cards, you have an ace, a 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 10, and a jack, queen, and king for each of 4 suits. It's similar in the tarot. We also have 4 suits, which are traditionally wands, cups, swords, and pentacles, which have different meanings in terms of the spheres of life that they represent. And for each of those suits, we have an ace up to 10, plus we have 4 court cards. Now, depending on the tarot system, what the 4 court cards are might vary. So the Thoth tarot system, I believe, has a different approach than the RWS tarot system, from what I understand. But in most of the decks that I'll be showing in this project, those court cards will be page, knight, queen, and king. So that's the minor arcana. But the Fool is not part of the minor arcana. The Fool is part of the major arcana, which are 22 cards that are separate from the suit cards. And usually in books on tarot or in decks when you first receive them, the major arcana will be placed at the beginning of the deck. So in my mind, and in many people's minds who use tarot, we have the major arcana first, and then we have the various suit cards. And the major arcana cards, most of them are numbered. So the Magician, which is the next one that we will be looking at, is card number 1. And the World is card number 21. Plus we have the Fool, making 22 major arcana cards in total. Now, in terms of the meanings of the cards, I think of the major arcana as being about the big arcs of our life. So these might be our lifelong learning journeys, and there are plenty of things in our lives that are and should be lifelong learning journeys. There are things that we should never stop learning about, I believe. And then there are long-term experiences, perhaps like relationships or areas of self-development or conflicts that we have within ourselves, our values, and the fundamental characteristics of the experience of being human. To me, this is what the major arcana is about. It's kind of like a zoomed out perspective on our lives. Whereas the minor arcana, in my mind at least, is more about our day-to-day life. If you think about a TV show, for example, the major arcana might be the story arc that a particular character has over the entire run of that TV show, whereas the minor arcana is more likely to be what happens in each episode. So to me, that's kind of the difference. And of course, it's not a firm, hard boundary. There is not a clear, defined difference between our day-to-day and our major arcs of our life. But as a guideline, I find that that's a helpful way to look at it. So the Fool is the 0 card in the major arcana. Or is it? Take a look at this one. This is the Fool from the Tarot de Marseille. I only just noticed when I was laying out this particular part of the video, there is no 0 on this version of the Fool, or Le Mans. And yet, when I checked the rest of my deck, the other major arcana do have numbers on them. Very often they are in Roman numerals, by the way. So what does that tell us? Well, interestingly, as I was doing the research for this video, a lot of the sources that I looked at mentioned that the Fool, being the 0 card, actually belongs anywhere in the deck. It doesn't have a fixed position. So the fact that I'm doing the Fool first is to some degree a nominal decision. It's because most of the books and decks that I have interacted with have the Fool first in the guidebook, but that's not always the case. In fact, my Pamela Colman Smith commemorative set came with The Pictorial Key to the Tarot by Arthur Edward Waite. So this would have been one of the first popular guidebooks to tarot as a divination tool or a self-development tool. And in this book, the Fool doesn't come at the beginning of the major arcana. It comes at the end, after the World. And I think that reflects that in some ways the major arcana is a cycle that keeps turning and turning. As we journey through from the Fool all the way to the World, we find ourselves as the Fool again. So with this being the 0 card, for much of my life with the tarot, I have considered that to be the first card in the deck before the Magician, and a lot of the literature reinforces that by the way that books are arranged. However, I think it's more accurate that the 0 actually indicates the absence of a position in the deck. In other words, the Fool belongs anywhere and is meaningful anywhere in the sequence of a tarot deck. Next up, let's think about the different kinds of figures that we see represented on the cards of the Fool. Now, looking through my deck collection, I noticed that of the decks that appear to kind of present figures from a bygone age, however realistic or not that bygone age might be, they seem to fall into 2 camps. The first camp is what I call the jongleur type. So a jongleur is a French word that translates as jester or juggler, or sort of a combination of those things. And it represents a kind of traveling performer who is depicted in this Tarot de Marseille version of the Fool. Now, as you can see here, this figure has little bells around their collar. They're carrying a little bundle on a stick, which I've learned is called a bindle. I looked that up in between last time and this time. And you can see that their clothes are also a bit worn. So in this case, in fact, their butt is hanging out. The Tarot de Marseille artists did have a bit of a sense of humor about these things. In fact, in the book, The Fool's Journey, it shows a few kind of variations on this specific historical image. And in one of them, the Fool's whole butt is hanging out. And in fact, their tackle is hanging down and being attacked by this little dog behind them. Now let's look at some more versions of the jongleur type. So this one is from the Circle of Life Tarot, which is one of the round decks that I have. You can see that this particular version of the Fool has a rather ridiculous outfit on. They're being attacked on the ankle by what looks like a little cat. They are tripping over their own leg, and in fact their bundle on their bindle is much, much smaller even than their hat. So there's quite a sort of sense of them being a bit ridiculous in this image. Here we have from the Ehrenberg Tarot, which does a lot of real close-up versions of the imagery. We have a very typical, what we would think of as kind of a Tudor or medieval court jester kind of an image. Again, with a bit of a bell on the hat there. Here we go, we have the Good Fortune Tarot version. A little bit of a combination of like Harlequin and jester costumery here. And here with the Fyodor Pavlov Tarot, we have that Harlequin type clown. Have another cat here. We'll get to animal companions in a bit. And then just briefly a few more examples of the jongleur type. We have the Tarocchi del Veltrate, the Enchanted Tarot, the Zillick Tarot, the Magic Makers Tarot, the Paulina Tarot, the Joie de Vivre Tarot. These 3 down here are all by the same artist. The Revelations Tarot, which has a very, very stylized jongleur type. It also has a tiny baby in the center. And this is one where there's another image when you reverse it. And then not quite a jongleur, but still in that kind of category of clowning performers is this one, which is the Unveiled Tarot, where we have what looks like to me an inauguration, perhaps of a politician, perhaps of a very high-ranking politician, and superimposed over that we have a circus clown, which I think is a very interesting commentary. Now, I think this kind of a version of the figure of the fool, the clown or jongleur type, gives us some clues as to one of the meanings of the fool. In a court, in a royal court, in days gone by, please don't ask me what age we're talking about here because I'm not a historian at all, but as far as I understand it, there was very often a position in the court called the fool, and we sometimes think of these jesters as filling that role, but they weren't necessarily kind of dressed up in jester garb. Sometimes it would just have been one of the monarch's companions or something like that who was designated as the fool. There's a book by Philippa Gregory called The Queen's Fool, which gives a different depiction of that than the jester type. But the role that this served in the court was for someone to be able to make fun of the monarch, to be able to, in some ways, speak truth to power, to be able to say the things that no one else was able to say because they might have been beheaded. And this served a role in keeping the monarch humble, maybe even in drawing their attention to some of their shortcomings and areas where they needed to work on things. And so this kind of depiction of the fool, I think, does give us some clues as to what the fool is about. So it's not adhering to the rules that everyone else has to adhere to. It's doing things differently. It's being willing to say the things that other people don't say. It's being willing to do things that other people might think looks foolish. And sometimes wisdom can look very foolish to people who don't understand that wisdom. In several of the books I was reading for this preparation, they talked about comedians in our day and age as serving this purpose. And they cited people like Trevor Noah, like Jimmy Kimmel, like Stephen Colbert, as serving that role of the fool, of speaking truth to power under the remit of comedy. And when you think about it, I think laughter often makes it easier to look at our shortcomings. So I wonder whether by serving that role of the fool in our culture today, if they're allowing us to look at our own shortcomings and the shortcomings of the world that we're operating in a way that feels safer because it's wrapped in laughter. So that's one of the kind of depictions of the fool that I noticed as I was going through all these different versions. Now, the next type of depiction that I noticed was what I'm calling the fairy tale type fool. So in this case, we have ones like the Rider-Waite-Smith version of the fool. So this is from the Pamela Colman Smith Centennial edition of the Colman Smith deck. And this type of depiction is, I think, reminiscent of, often in fairy tales and folk tales, there will be a young person who goes out to seek their fortune or goes off to seek adventure, and they really don't know what they're getting themselves into. Often they will be treated as quite foolish by the others around them. And sometimes they're even depicted as being quite ignorant or unintelligent. But these figures are really open to what the world may be able to show them as they venture out into it. So to add to this version, I've also got the Crystal Tarot, which I'm putting in a similar category. The Gilded Art Nouveau Tarot, which is very much almost a complete duplicate of the Rider-Waite-Smith version. The Ethereal Tarot Lunar Edition, the Essential Tarot, what's a bad lit spot there? The Mystical Moments Tarot, which is probably too small for you to see it from far away. I'm kind of counting this one in the fairy tales one, even though could interpret it other ways as well. The Tarot of Oppositions, which is again one where we can reverse the image and get a different kind of a sense of it. And then these two, I'm kind of counting in the fairy tale type, even though they don't look like the kind of figures that we would normally think of in fairy tales. But this one is from mythology and depicts the god Dionysus. And this one, actually, this could be a fairy tale figure. This could be someone who has been raised in the woods and wears a cape of moss. That's certainly something we might see in traditional old fairy tales, isn't it? Now, to better understand this kind of version of the Fool, I have been in part drawing on what I learned from this book. I read this book last year and I reread it again early this year in audiobook form. And it's actually one of my favorite books ever that I've read. It won my Best Book of the Year award last year because, you know, I have award ceremonies just for my books because that's the kind of person I am. And it's an incredible book that I think that anyone would benefit from reading. And it's about fairy tales and how they inform our understanding of and attitudes towards disability in our day-to-day life. Fantastic book. But from this made me think about, with these cards, when I saw them, that archetype of the fairy tale fool setting out on their adventure, setting out to seek their fortune or to seek adventure in the world or to sell the cow or whatever it is that gets the fairy tale started. As I said earlier, they are often kind of denigrated or seen as foolish by their village or their families, but often they do come out on top in the end in fairy tales being what they are. Now, I think this version tells us a few other things about the Fool. There is this sense of openness to experience. There is this sense of kind of joyous wonder. If you look at kind of this posture here, this openness to the sky, this one depicts it really beautifully too. This sort of joyous, wondrous openness. Even though there's a cliff in front of them, and we'll get to that soon, they've got this real exuberance about them and this enthusiasm and this sense of moving towards something that they're excited about. And as with the jongleur types, many of these have a little bindle or a bundle of some kind that they're carrying with them, or a satchel. So there is also that sense of them setting out on a journey with very little resources that they're carrying with them, just the very simplest essence that they're taking along. So once again, this type of depiction of the fool speaks to being willing to do things that other people see as foolish. It speaks to being open to experience, open to new things, open to new adventures. Now let's take a look at some modern depictions of the fool, that is, characters that we might see in our day-to-day life. This one is from the Modern Witch deck, and this is one of my favorites because I think that they have done such a fantastic job of quite faithfully recreating the RWS fool with a very modern character. So you can see that there is similarity in the character's dress. Instead of the mountains in the background, we see a cityscape. We've got a backpack instead of a bindle, and the posture of the figure is very similar. So I think that's a very clever adaptation. Here we have two more depictions that use that cliff imagery from the RWS deck. In this case, this one is the This Might Hurt deck, and this one is the Fifth Spirit Tarot. And you can see that in these two, they've also included the depiction of the rose held in the Fool's hand. And both of these characters are sniffing the rose, which reminds me of that phrase, stop and smell the roses, which to me speaks about that exuberance and that joy that the Fool takes in engaging with life and engaging with the world. Now, all three of these ones have a little dog as their animal companion. We will talk more about animal companions later, But I think that's a very cute inclusion. Here's another very exuberant image. This one is from Songs for the Journey Home, where we have a figure. It's hard to tell if it's an adult or a child, but it's wearing very bright, possibly childlike clothing, a propeller hat, and swinging out over a kind of a gorge from the top of a sapling. Again, there's that sense of freedom and exuberance and fearlessness. Actually, that's something that I couldn't quite put my finger on the word before, but in those fairy tale depictions, and even in the depictions of the jongleur type, the performer, there is a fearlessness that is required to be able to perform, and especially to be able to perform in a way that some people might see as ridiculous. So here we have a different kind of fearlessness depicted. And in fact, I think this one indicates a sense of fearlessness as well. This reminds me of that saying, what is it, jump and the net will appear, or jump and the parachute will appear. It's like stepping out into what most people would say was an absolute danger, an absolute risk. But this fool knows that there is something that is going to uphold them and support them. Maybe they can sense something that we can't. This one's a very sweet depiction of the Fool. This is from the Unfolding Path Tarot. So this one shows a child. They're surrounded by butterflies and they have a balloon and a beautiful, happy, joyful smile on their face. Like they're just engaging fully with life in the way that children do. And that, I think, depicts well the aspect of the Fool that is about youthfulness or innocence. Now, that doesn't have to mean literal youthfulness. As children, we have a limited amount of knowledge about the world. And as a result of that, we have limited barriers to being able to engage with the world and all it has to offer. We're free of so many of the fears and inhibitions that would prevent us from engaging as fully with the world as adults. And that's something that I think we can take from the meaning of the Fool throughout our life as well, to try and reclaim that and recapture that. And in fact, here's a nice contrast that shows that quite well. Here we have from the Housewife's Tarot, our figure who seems quite overwhelmed with all of the things spilling out of her bag, all of the demands on her, all of the trappings of adult life, and I think what she's meant to want. And in the process, is she about to step off the roof of her house and come crashing down? That's one possibility. Or is she shedding all of those things so that she can take that step out into greater freedom and into the unknown? Now, this one's very special. This is one of my favorite Fools in my collection. This is from the New World Tarot. And the guidebook describes this figure as someone who has basically become disillusioned with the systems that we live in. To quote the guidebook, they sought after stability and in the process lost their soul. And so they've chosen to step away from the capitalist systems that they were operating in and step out into the very much unknown. If you look very closely, you can see that the train station sign says Yonkers, but someone has graffitied over it and it says nowhere. So like those fairy tale fools, this person is stepping out into the unknown in a way that many people would consider foolish, with just the backpack on their back and a sense that there must be another option out there. So I think that one is quite profound. Next, let's look at some animal decks and what animal the illustrators have chosen to illustrate the Fool. Let's start with this one, which is the Forager's Daughter Tarot. And in this one, we can only actually partially see an animal, but we see a lot of potential. So we have an egg that is starting to crack. I think in the guidebook, the author describes this as a question of, has the egg fallen out of the nest and cracked, or is it about to hatch? We have a butterfly just beginning to emerge out of its chrysalis, and we have a chrysalis that hasn't yet emerged. And we also have this taproot and these shoots, which show branching possibilities. and the emergence of new growth. And on a similar theme with a hatching egg, here we have a sea turtle in the Orion's Animal Tarot hatching from its egg. Now, unlike birds, when sea turtles hatch, their parents don't care for them. Their parents have already left the beach where the eggs were buried, and the sea turtles hatch and have to run the gauntlet of trying to avoid predators to get to the water, and then they have to avoid predators in the water. So I think it's only about it's a tiny percentage, something like 1 in 1,000 baby sea turtles actually make it to adulthood. But all the sea turtle has when it hatches is its instinct, and in fact that instinct is so strong that if the sea turtle does make it to adulthood, it will return to the exact same beach after traversing thousands and thousands of miles of ocean in order to reproduce. So I think that does a good job of depicting another element of the Fool, which is the idea of instinct and relying on our sense of instinct. Now next we have this one from the Spirit Song Tarot, which is Paulina Fay's Animal deck, published under Paulina Cassidy, which is the name that they used to publish under. And in this case we have a gazelle depicted as the Fool. As you can see, the card's been renamed to the Traveller, so again reinforcing that idea of journeys and adventure. And I didn't immediately get a sense of why a gazelle would be chosen for the Fool. With the sea turtle, for example, a brand new baby sea turtle, I could kind of understand how that would depict the Fool even without reading the guidebook. But with this one, I really needed to look at it. And some of the things in the guidebook were the sense of enthusiasm and energy in the way that a gazelle bounds and leaps, and also the sense of maneuverability and freedom and ability to zigzag and adapt and change depending on what the world throws at them. So actually, I can see why that could be a pretty interesting animal to choose to depict the Fool. Then from the Verdance Tarot, which is from another one of my favourite artists, Stephanie Puy-Monlaw, we have this depiction of the Fool as the coyote. Now, I don't live in North America or Central America, but from what I understand, the coyote is very much a trickster in a lot of mythology. Again, there's that sense of leaping and bounding. We also have a mischievous squirrel down here and some small phoenixes as well. This is such an interesting deck that you can't quite tell if you're on land or underwater or both at once. We also have down here, we have an acorn, which also indicates that sense of potential. And in this card, Coyote chases a butterfly. Again, that sense of following and engaging with what life brings you. We've had a few cards with butterflies. I can think of at least one other one. I wonder if there have been many other butterflies. Let's keep a lookout for butterflies as we continue. Here's the last of our animal deck Fools. So this one is from the Wild Unknown Pocket Edition. Now with this one, again, I can get a sense, kind of without reading the guidebook, of why a duckling might represent the Fool, because it's a creature at the very beginning of its life and it's really operating on not much other than instinct. If you've ever seen ducklings following their mother, you'll know that they very much have very strong instincts early in life. However, when I read the guidebook, I had a bit of an issue with this one. It said something like the Fool has stepped out of the nest and is ready to fly. So the first issue I had with that is that, to my knowledge at that time, ducks don't nest in trees, and we have a branch here. Turns out I was wrong about that. The Australian wood duck does nest in trees, and once the ducklings hatch, they actually have to jump out of the nest onto the ground. They can't fly yet. So I was a little bit wrong in my reaction to some degree if this is an Australian wood duck. However, this Fool is not ready to fly. This Fool does not have flight feathers yet. That is down. That is not flying feathers. Even though there is a picture that does the rounds of the internet occasionally that shows a downy duckling supposedly flying, I'm pretty sure that someone just pegged a duckling into the air and took a photo of it, because downy ducklings can't fly yet. However, perhaps I'm being too rigid in my thinking, and part of the fool is not adhering to the rules as we know them. So maybe this is a nonconformist depiction of the fool as a duckling in a tree about to fly. So if I look at it a bit more generously, let's go with that. Now there's a few versions of the fool I have that don't fit into any of the categories that I've shown so far, but I wanted to show them anyway because I really like them. This one is from the Phantasma Tarot, the Shadowscapes Tarot, the Numinous Tarot, Tarot Mucha, and the Cirque du Tarot. And these ones bridge us nicely into the next piece of symbolism that I wanted to talk about, which is cliffs and high places. Here, this fool is stepping off what looks like a moon in the sky. We don't know how high. This fool is diving off a cliff. This fool is on some kind of a high pillar. Again, looks like they're against the sky, and they're leaning forwards, and it seems like their weight is just about to tip into the space in front of them. But there are birds with cords or ribbons that perhaps are going to stop them from falling. Our Taramucha is approaching a cliff similar to some of the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith style imagery, and our Cirque du Tarot fool seems to be leaping down from a high place on the back of their rabbit companion. And of course, this depiction from the Spacious Tarot is one of my favorites that I think depicts this concept of the cliff very evocatively. This one feels like being the fool in the card approaching the cliff. And in fact, I've just had a look through all 45 decks in my collection, and if we count the duckling on the branch and the gazelle, which seemed to be leaping from quite a high place, then 24 out of my 45 decks depict a cliff or a high place of some kind in the card of the Fool. And to my mind, that indicates kind of a sense of risk or danger, this sense of maybe being about to fall, or on the flip side of that, making a leap of faith. Now, interestingly, I have one other card that sort of captures this in a way that isn't about a high place. This is the Tarot of Mystical Moments, the miniature edition. And our fool in this card seems to be walking kind of through a garden, and there's this plant with a flower on it just next to them. But underneath we can see that in fact they are walking on what appears to be some kind of a crocodile or a dangerous monster. So there's this sense of unknown risk in some of the cards, a risk that perhaps the fool is not aware of or not fully aware of. And that's another one of the sort of divergences that I noticed when I was going through these cards. So we have a fool like this one here in the Numinous Tarot who seems to be willingly leaping from the cliff in a dive that they're very confident doing. And just while we're looking at this card, I just want to point out one small detail. Hopefully you can see it. Right here on their chest, there's a mark that to me looks like a top surgery scar. And I just really appreciated the inclusion of a detail like that in such a beautiful, confident image. So that's one of our willing fools diving off the cliff. Similarly, in that one from Songs for the Journey Home, our fool was willingly, it seems, swinging out over the high place, the gorge. And in our Fifth Spirit Tarot, we have our fool who seems to be willingly stepping out into the space in front of the cliff. So these types seem to represent the fool who is doing something where they know what they're doing, even though others might consider what they're doing to be foolish. Then on the other hand, we have fools who appear to maybe not be aware of the risk that they're facing. So for example, this one from the Circle of Life Tarot seems to be tripping unintentionally and perhaps going to go over the cliff as a result of that, perhaps partly due to that vicious little animal attacking their ankle as well. This one, again, I really love the way that they've adapted the RWS full image to this one. This figure looks like they're distracted perhaps by their phone and the day that they're strolling through, and they don't necessarily see the cliff in front of them because they are wrapped up in what they're paying attention to. And then we have this one, which even more clearly depicts someone who is wrapped up in enjoying the day, enjoying their world, enjoying the smell of the rose, and perhaps not aware that they're about to step off the cliff. So that's a bit of a dichotomy that I noticed amongst the images between the fools who seem to be knowingly taking a risk or knowingly doing something that others would consider risky, and those who seem to be perhaps unaware of the risk. And this is something that keeps coming out to me, that there's two sides to the fool. There's the fool that doesn't have the knowledge or awareness of their situation, the fool who doesn't know what they don't know. And then there's the other type of fool who is doing something that others might consider to be foolish or dangerous. But the fool has some kind of insight or awareness or courage even, or willingness or freedom that those people who consider them foolish don't have. And so the people who consider the fool to be foolish, they don't know what they don't know. So this keeps emerging for me, and I think it might be integral to what my key to the fool ends up being. But let's keep going. So I've just done a quick sort of all my fools, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 of these fools have an animal companion, which is a dog. So there's a lot of representation of dogs as the companion in the fool. And in this one from the Good Fortune Tarot, we also have that image of the hatching or cracking egg depicted as well. I wonder what the bumblebee in the bindle means. Maybe we'll come back to that one. So we have a lot of little dog animal companions. And for the ones where the fool is approaching a cliff, it's often a bit ambiguous as to whether is the dog trying to warn them that they're about to step over the cliff. This one doesn't look too concerned. Or is the dog also happily unaware of the risk that they're about to take? We also have only 2 cats as the animal companion, and one of them I'm not sure could be really accurately described as a companion, more like an antagonist perhaps, in this one from the Circle of Life Tarot. And being a cat person, I really appreciate you, Fyodor Pavlov, for including a cat as the animal companion in your version of the Fool. Thank you for that. And then we have several cards where either we have a different animal or an animal that can't really be identified easily. So from the Magic Makers Tarot, can't really say what that one is, but we do have an animal companion. The Cirque du Tarot, we have the White Rabbit. Interestingly, some of the books that I used to prepare for this video talked about following the white rabbit down the rabbit hole as being a fool kind of an experience or story. Again, this one's a little bit hard to identify. Is it a dog? Looks like sort of some kind of alien chihuahua. Slightly dog-like, but I'm not sure it could be accurately called a dog. Here we have on the upright image a dove, and on the reversed image a weasel or a stoat. And in this one, as well as the birds which we talked about before, we have a little fox accompanying our fool. And in this case, we have what looks like a bat in the Joie de Vivre Tarot trying to hold our fool back from that ledge. So what does the presence of an animal companion mean? This is one where I probably don't have as much insight as about some of the other things we've talked about. So I would love to hear from you about how you interpret the presence of an animal companion on the Fool cards. But just as a kind of a starting point, I can think of at least two things that might represent. One is that instinct again, that sense of following instinct, following that sense of what to do that comes from within and not from what the world around us tells us that we should be doing. And also, particularly because so many of them are dogs, I think that maybe there's that sense of exuberance, of fully engaging with life. Even though I'm not a dog person, if there's one thing that dogs do well, it's exuberance. And so I wonder if maybe that's part of what that represents. Now, I'm just about talked out, but I did just want to take a moment to talk about the Fool and queerness, because several of the books that I read really made very strong links between the concept of the Fool and the experience of being queer. One of them had a really great quote, which was, "Admitting you're queer and deciding which letter of the beautifully long acronym we use now are totally different." That one's from Queering the Tarot by Cassandra Snow. And I think that makes a really good point about how when we realize that we're queer, we really are stepping into a lot of unknowns about ourselves, about people that we might connect with, and about the way that the world is and the way that the world might treat us. So from that perspective, I feel like the Fool could capture something quite universal about the experience of being queer. And again, this is something where others might consider queerness or admitting queerness to be foolish, even to be wrong, even to be immoral. But when we follow our instincts, when we follow our deep knowledge of who we are, often what we're doing is very, very wise, but it may seem foolish to those who don't understand. So we are simultaneously the wise fool who is seen as foolish by others, and also the fool who doesn't know what they don't know yet, who is stepping out into an unknown, who is that fairy tale figure setting out on an adventure of discovery, of greater connection with self and others. And queerness isn't just about how we experience gender, sexuality, and relationships. For many of us, queerness requires us to deconstruct what the journey means, as the New World Tarot puts it in their book. We have to question and dismantle the things that we've been told are the way that life works, and we have to create new versions for ourselves. For example, that can include things like, what is a family? For many of us, chosen family is our true family. It can include things like, what are the criteria by which we recognize a healthy and life-enhancing partnership? And it most certainly can be, what is most important to us in life? And in what ways is that the same? And in what ways is that different, often very different, than what we have been told and taught should be important to us in life? But the Fool isn't just about following our own personal path and being true to ourselves. The Fool can also be a revolutionary. And several of the books that I used to prepare for this video made a connection between the Fool and the Stonewall Riot. For those of you who don't know, the Stonewall Riot was a landmark in the history of queer liberation, where police raided the Stonewall pub, which was a queer venue, and rather than submitting to the violence that the police were perpetrating against them, the patrons fought back, beginning with someone, and who that was is subject to debate, hurling a brick through the window. Now, that decision by each of those participants and by that community as a group not to submit to the rules and the oppression that they were expected to take, that is also the Fool. There's a great quote actually in Radical Tarot, which I'll read for you now. The fool isn't afraid to be laughed at as they stumble down the path to joy, and they'll just as quickly crack a joke at their own expense as hurl a brick through a window for the revolution. So for me, doing this exercise has really helped me to connect the meaning of the Fool to queerness and to my experience of queerness, and to what that might mean in a broader sense as well. This is actually day 3 now of filming this video. It's taking a fair bit longer than I had expected, so I think this is going to be quite a long video. Just quickly though, I mentioned earlier in the video that this card, this is the Good Fortune Tarot's version of the Fool, has a bee in the bindle, and in fact a shining bee. It's like emanating light. I think it's a bee. Could it be a firefly? I think it's a bee. And I did look up what the guidebook said, and there was no mention of the bee. So I'm unsure of what this bee might symbolize, and I'd be really interested to hear what you think it might be. Funnily enough, I am sure that I had a dream last night that told me what the bee meant, and I cannot remember it. So maybe let's crowdsource this. Let's see if we can figure out together, what does the bee in the bindle mean on this version of the Fool? Now, before we dive into the meaning of the Fool, based off what we've seen on these cards today, I did just want to take a moment to talk about representation. Now, a lot of the decks in my collection, particularly the ones that I have acquired recently, do a fantastic job of including a lot of diversity in the figures depicted in their decks. And that's actually why I've chosen to purchase a lot of them. However, I do think it's also important for us to look at, are there tendencies to depict certain cards with particular kinds of people over others? And when does that make sense for the card? And when is that maybe something that we need to look at more deeply as a tarot community? Now, when it comes to gender, I felt like there was a reasonable amount of diversity. There were plenty of masc figures, there were plenty of femme figures, there were figures that I read as trans or non-binary or gender ambiguous. So for example, this version from the This Might Hurt deck, to me, and not everyone might read it this way, but to me, I read this figure as a trans masc figure, and I really value seeing that in the deck. And here's 2 more examples. We've got the Good Fortune Tarot and the Fifth Spirit Tarot, where these appear to me to be maybe more gender ambiguous, possibly non-binary, and I really appreciate those sort of depictions as well. So on gender, I felt like there was a reasonable amount of diversity. I did notice that the figures on the cards of the Fool were predominantly white. Even in decks where there was a lot of ethnic diversity across the deck, I noticed that a lot of the depictions of the Fool were white. I did find a few examples of darker skin colours, but even with those, I'll grab them. So here's 3 examples depicting what appears to be darker skin tones. We've got the Good Fortune Tarot, the Unfolding Path Tarot, and the Numinous Tarot. But even in these cases, we're not seeing hair texture or facial features that would, for example, recognizably tell us that a figure is black. And that's not a criticism of any specific deck creator, just something that I think that we as a tarot community should keep in our awareness. Now, another thing that I didn't see much representation of, and this is not surprising because there's not a lot of representation of it in decks generally, is visible disability. There has been a lot of good developments in that regard, and a lot of the decks that I have in my collection do include people with visible disability or visible differences. But it was interesting to me that none of the decks depicted that on the card of the Fool. The closest I could find to it were those depictions where the Fool has a walking stick. So here we have the Marseille Tarot, the Tarocchi del Vitrate, the Paulina Tarot, and the Phantasma Tarot. But my impression is that these walking sticks aren't showing us a disability so much as they're showing us the element of being on a journey, where an able-bodied person might still use a walking stick to conserve energy. Now, another element where there wasn't a lot of diversity was age, and this one I find really interesting. We had a lot of very young looking fools, which makes sense. The Fool is inexperienced. We've got that young fairy tale figure setting out on a journey to seek their fortune or have an adventure and so on. And often we associate the Fool's kind of enthusiasm and wonder with youth. But I think that this is a little bit of a missed opportunity. And I say this as someone who is very much in middle-aged. Aging is one of the biggest unknowns that we face in life. It is one of the biggest things where we're stepping into something where we don't have experience of what that might mean for us and what we might need. So, for example, a person with a uterus at the beginning of menopause, that is a full experience. A person who's retiring, that is an experience of the full. That is very much a new phase of life that requires new skills and new approaches. And of course, learning how to live life to the fullest when our bodies perhaps don't do the things that they used to do when we were younger, that's a full experience as well. So I'm sort of percolating. One of my long-term dreams is to create a tarot deck myself. And I'm sort of wondering about maybe a full image that's of someone older than we typically see in images of the Fool. So that's just something ticking away in the back of my brain. You know, as I have been considering the Fool, this graph keeps coming to my mind. This is one you might have seen floating around the internet, and it very often gets labeled as the Dunning Kruger effect. However, this is not the Dunning Kruger effect. That's a popular misunderstanding. And this graph, rather than coming out of any particular psychological research, is more of a visual aid that people have created to kind of express something that we anecdotally or experientially might feel to be true. So what this graph indicates is that when someone starts to learn something, so they have a little bit of skill, their confidence in that goes up dramatically. Then as they start to learn more about it, their confidence decreases because they start to understand how complex that topic or that skill might be. And then as they continue to learn, their confidence begins to climb again. Now, this is often pejoratively referred to as Mount Stupid. And this effect is often summed up as stupid people think they're smart and smart people think they're stupid. Now, to start with, I just want to put that to bed. The concepts of smartness and stupidness are not helpful ones. So let's just take that part out of this. But I do think that this graph represents something that can tell us something about the Fool, which is that I think we've all had a learning experience that looks like this, where we've started to learn something about a topic and we felt like we understood that topic pretty well. And then over time, we've learned more about it and realized that actually we don't know so much about it. And then over time, perhaps learn more. So I think this works better as an expression of our individual experiences of learning than it does about pejoratively labeling people as stupid or not. Now, to give an example of this, when I was young, I was raised in a fairly mainstream kind of household and I was sent to a religious school. And, you know, one of the things that I started learning about was illegal drugs and the effect of those. And so early in my learning, I was taught that drugs are bad, they have bad effects, and they do harm to people's lives. So I thought that I had a pretty good understanding of that topic. And it made sense to me that drug use should be criminalized. However, then as my life went on, I started to learn that the Netherlands, for example, which has decriminalized all substances, has much lower levels of the social harms that most other countries have that are associated with drugs. I also came to learn more about why people use substances. And in fact, I had a personal experience that showed me very viscerally why someone might make those choices. And so then I came to understand that I actually don't know what is the best way for us as a society to approach substance use. And then over time, I've learned more. I've had the privilege of working with and learning from some really amazing harm minimization practitioners. And I've started to get a sense that that works better. Harm minimization and decriminalization works better at preventing the harms associated with substance use than criminalization. And I know that there's a lot I don't know and that there are experts who know a lot more than me who I would defer to. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because I think the Fool can be here or here on this graph. These two high points, I think, tell us something about the fool. On this one, we've got the inexperienced fool, the fool who is maybe at the beginning of a learning journey, who doesn't know how much they don't know. And then on this end, we've got someone who's passed through a much longer learning journey and who does have insight and expertise, but who may in fact look foolish to someone here. If someone when I was younger had talked to me about harm minimization, I would have thought that's ridiculous. And I know that there are still people around who see it that way today. So the person who has gone through that learning and how complex it is and maybe reached conclusions that don't seem like the truth from this part of the graph, they can appear foolish to people who haven't learned as much as they have. So again, this is to me that double-sided version of the fool. There is the fool who doesn't know what they don't know, and then there is the fool who other people think is foolish when they're actually wise, because the person observing or listening to them doesn't know what they don't know. So that's just my take that I've been taking away from this investigation. Let me know if you agree with it or not. Now, just before we wrap this all up, I want to read just a few quotes from some of the books that I used to prepare for this video that I think capture things about the fool really well. The first one is from Finding the Fool by Meg Jones Wall. That moment when we decide to throw caution to the wind and chase the fantasy anyway, when we begin to actively move toward that vision that is manifested in our mind and begin a radical journey, that is the brilliant, wide-eyed, aspirational energy of the fool. The next one is from Radical Tarot by Charlie Claire Burgess. Our fool asks us to stop following the rules just because they're rules, to think deeply, critically, and freely about the beliefs and values we hold to be true, to reclaim our agency, intuition, and personal and collective power, to be mad enough to fight the structures of abusive power, and be foolish enough to believe in a different and better, dare I say, utopian world. And finally, from Unlocking the Tarot, Create Your Own Keys by Lisa Papez. In truth, the fool could be walking forward into something spectacular or something devastating. Those who see how big the risks are see only a fool. Those who find the fool's open-hearted enthusiasm for life inspirational and who wish they could trust so easily see a genius. So now the question is, what am I going to put in my personal guidebook that I'm creating for my key to the fool? So on this side, I'm going to put various different keywords and phrases that I think reflect the fool. But then here, I'm going to try and find my one key that kind of leads me into all of those different meanings. I am so nervous about doing this in pen. I'm really tempted to do it in pencil so I can change it later, but I think I need to commit. And as I've said in previous videos, allow myself to do it imperfectly. So what do we have here? We have the idea of a journey. Inexperience. There's a sense of wonder and joy. There's risk. Known and unknown. There's nonconformity. There's a willingness to look foolish. Radical choices. Instinct or inner guidance. There's also ignorance, and I don't mean that in any kind of pejorative sense, but just in the sense of being unaware. is not knowing what you don't know. And for me, that one, that almost was going to be my key, that you don't know what you don't know. Because I feel like that is at the heart of the Fool. We all don't know what we don't know. And in fact, I've got an idea for a video that expands on that I might do soon. But we all have things in life where we have no idea that we have things yet to learn. But we don't know that yet. We don't know that there's a gap in our knowledge or our understanding. But I think the Fool invites us to know that we don't know what we don't know. If we don't know that we don't know what we don't know, well, let me put that more clearly. If we don't recognize that we don't know what we don't know, then we can be kind of arrogant. Then we can overestimate how well we understand things. Then we can not be open-minded to other ideas or other perspectives when they come along. But if we do know that we don't know what we don't know, or to put that more clearly, if we do recognize that we don't know what we don't know, then that allows us to be humble enough to learn and to grow. And for me, that's really, really central to the concept of the Fool. So that was very nearly going to be my key, but I think I have another one in mind. Also have beginnings, sometimes maybe a bit of recklessness. And that might be something I might read more into a reversed Fool, for example. There's a willingness to take a different path. And I'm sure there's probably about 24 other things that I could add there that will come to me after I finish filming this video, but that will do for now. So now what am I going to put for my one key for the Fool that kind of ties me to all of those different things? For me, I think my key for the Fool is into the unknown. And the reason why that is my key is that's a phrase that connects for me to all of these other ideas that we've been talking about. So a journey, for example, an inexperience, making radical choices is very much stepping into the unknown. That's kind of part of the definition of it being a radical choice, is that it's something that's not established. It captures that ignorance, that there are things that we don't know what we don't know, and beginnings and willingness to take a different path and so on. So for me, that's the Fool, and that's what I've taken from this exercise. I would be really interested as to what you would put as your key to the Fool after watching what probably is going to end up being quite a long video with me on my thoughts on what I've seen in the cards. Now, as a fun little finishing point, I thought it would be fun with each of the cards to try and come up with a song, a book, and a movie or TV show that I think expresses some of what that card is about. So I gave some thought to this prior to this video. My choice of a song for the Fool is, unsurprisingly, Into the Unknown from Frozen 2. I am very lucky that my kids were already past the age of Disney movies when Frozen came out, so we never had the obsession. And I honestly can't stand the first Frozen movie, but I have a bit of a soft spot for Frozen 2, and I actually really love some of the songs in it. And Into the Unknown, I think, particularly when the chorus hits, it really captures that sense of expansiveness that comes with that experience of stepping into the unknown as the Fool. The book that I've selected is A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I read this recently. It's quite a short little book, and it's like a balm for the soul. It's like a warm hug. It's like spending a few hours in another universe where so many of the problems that we're faced with in this one have been solved. And yet, the main character of this story experiences this very strong, kind of irrational urge to set off on an unconventional journey in which they really don't know what they're going to face. So that one's very much, I feel like, a story that captures the idea of the Fool. And then as a movie or TV show, I'm going to choose The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. I'm going to try and explain why without saying anything too spoilery or too triggering. But the premise of The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt is that the main character has been sequestered away from the world since she was a teenager for many years, and then returns to society and has to find her way in the world with very little understanding of how the world works, and having missed out on a big chunk of developmental learning how to be an adult. So I think that one connects with the idea of the fool pretty well also. Well, tarot friends, that is it. I finally got to the end of finishing this video. If you've made it to the end, thank you so much. Once again, if you'd like to continue on this journey of the Comparative Tarot Project with me, where we do this exercise with all of the cards in a tarot deck, looking at how different artists and different authors have depicted and conceptualized each of the cards, and thereby trying to learn more about each card in the tarot deck and strengthen our understanding of and relationship with the tarot and our understanding of the experience of being human, then please do subscribe, hit the bell icon, and that way YouTube will notify you when there is a new video. And I would also appreciate it so much if you gave this video a like. That tells YouTube that other people might enjoy this video as well. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, tarot friends.